Welcome to this edition of Talking Legal with Templars. Today we're talking about that grand startup idea. My name is Dayo Okusami, I'm a partner at the firm. With me I have Pamela Ojiego, who's an associate at the firm. Pamela, first question, what are the three broad principles founders should be thinking about getting that startup idea off the ground?
The three broad principles founders should be thinking about are 1, funding options, 2, the legal framework, and 3, the intellectual property rights.
Now, I have a question regarding 3 of these headings. Let's start off with funding. Broad overview of some of the challenges and options that are available for funding your grand startup idea.
There are various funding options available to startups. So you can fund your startup through bootstrapping. This is basically raising money through friends, families, or through personal savings. Then you can also fund through crowdfunding. Crowdfunding is raising money from the public through crowdfunding platforms. Now, Section 22 Sub 5 of the Companies and Allied Matters Act and Section 67 Sub 1 of the Investment and Securities Act of 2007 prohibits equity-based crowdfunding for private entities. However, because of the growth of the tech industry and the need to raise funds, the Securities and Exchange Commission issued a new rule in January 2021 that permits private companies to crowdfund based on certain requirements as stated in the rule. Now, other than crowdfunding, one can also raise funds through angel investing and venture capitalists. That's high net worth individuals or corporations who invest in startup companies in exchange for equities in those companies.
Thank you, Pamela. Now, and it's very interesting you say that because apart from the point we made about Nigeria having the largest number of startups in 2021, according to FDI Intelligence, which is part of the Financial Times, Nigeria also had the largest inflow of foreign direct investment into these startups. Now, let's go to the legal and regulatory issues. I think they're broadly captured into 2. One, internal, getting your corporate organization, as well as the regulatory regime of where you're operating. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
On the internal part, that is getting your corporate organizations running. There are certain things you need to consider. Now, the industry you want to operate in, as well as your long-term goal, should determine the kind of company you want to set up. Now, for this issue, you have to ask yourself certain questions. What kind of company do I want to set up? How many shareholders do I want? What's the number of shares I want to issue? You have to consider your location. You have to consider other requirements of setting up a startup in your industry. Now, for all these requirements and in making this decision, you need quality legal advice so you can avoid pitfalls that may scare off potential investors or may be detrimental to your startup. Then on regulatory compliance, there are various regulatory bodies in Nigeria that guard different industries in which startups like to operate. For example, we have the Securities and Exchange Commission, then we have the Central Bank of Nigeria for fintech companies, then we have the National Information and Technology Development Agency, NITDA. So these regulatory bodies have rules and requirements that startups are supposed to comply with during the course of running their business.
Okay, so that's very good. And that's an important point that I think needs reiterating. You need to have proper legal advice in getting your corporate setup and governance up. We have seen this at Templars when we're doing due diligence on startup companies for investors, and just because you have situations of the shareholding is not properly done or allocated, directors are not properly appointed, this could scare off potential investors. And then of course the broader regulatory landscape of where you're operating in. You need to ensure that you're on the right side of the regulatory regime. That's very clear, Pamela. Thank you. We've talked about funding and the legal and regulatory framework from a company perspective and broader regulatory. You also talked about intellectual property for that grand startup idea. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, intellectual property is an important asset in every startup. The intellectual property involves the patent, the copyright, and the trademark. And most times, in a lot of startups, they are like 80% of the value of the startup. It is very important that we protect this intellectual property from the start. Immediately your ideas can be protected, you get proper legal advice and get them protected. Before you send your pitch out to your third parties or to potential investors, you make sure there's a non-disclosure agreement. This is just to protect your rights and keep your ideas safe.
Thank you for that. And it's something we'll delve into deeper because you don't want your grand idea basically stolen from you just because you've sent a pitch deck out to a number of people. Thank you for that, Pamela. We will be delving deeper into this as this series progresses into legal and regulatory framework, how to structure your ideas, how to push that grand startup idea forward. This was basically Startup 101 with Templars. So thank you for talking legal with Templars. We'll see you next time.